The Donner Party, the frozen nightmare of the Wild West. They set out chasing sunlight, 87 souls in a dream of green valleys, gold horizons, and a California promised by maps and whispers. But what they found was a frozen nightmare that would etch their names in American history forever. Hey, you're watching Echoing Westwinds, where the wind remembers what time forgot. If you love stories of courage, tragedy, and the untamed spirit of the old frontier, hit subscribe, and let's ride into one of the darkest journeys ever taken west. It began in the spring of 1846. Families from Illinois packed their lives into wooden wagons, bound for California, a land they'd never seen but believed in like heaven itself. Among them were George and Tamsin Donner, James and Margaret Reed, Patrick Breen, and dozens of others, ordinary settlers chasing a better life. They left Independence, Missouri, following the Oregon Trail, a route worn by thousands before them. But somewhere on that endless prairie, fate handed them a map drawn in lies. A man named Lansford Hastings had written a book, The Emigrant's Guide to Oregon and California. In it, he promised a new shortcut, a path through the Wasatch Mountains and the Great Salt Lake Desert that would save 300 miles. He called it Hastings Cutoff, but he'd never actually traveled it with wagons. Still, he sold it as the faster road to paradise, and the Donner Party, already late in the season, decided to take it. The moment they turned off the main trail, they stepped out of history and into legend. At first, the land seemed passable. Then the mountains rose like jagged teeth. They hacked through forest, carved trails with axes, and lowered wagons down cliffs with ropes. Progress slowed to a crawl, 1.5 miles a day. By the time they reached the Great Salt Lake Desert, their oxen were dying, their food was rotting, and their faith was gone. The desert stretched 80 miles across. Hastings had promised it would take 2 days. It took 6. The sun burned the animals alive, the ground sucked the wagons down like tar, and their water ran out before halfway. Children collapsed under the heat. Men stumbled with cracked lips and bleeding feet. When they finally reached the other side, half their cattle were dead. Their shortcut had cost them a month. Winter was closing in. By late October, the Donners lagged behind while the rest pressed toward the Sierra Nevada, a wall of granite and snow that stood between them and safety. But as they reached what's now Donner Pass, the first flakes began to fall. Within hours, snow was waist deep. By morning, 5 feet, they were trapped. The mountains sealed shut like a tomb, and so began the long white terror. They built crude shelters near Truckee Lake, now called Donner Lake, using oxhide roofs and broken wagons. The wind howled through the cracks, the fires smothered in the snow. Their food dwindled fast. Oxen were slaughtered and eaten, then dogs, then oxhide rugs boiled into a jelly so bitter they gagged but swallowed anyway. Patrick Breen began keeping a diary, his words small and trembling, each entry shrinking with his family's hope. "Came to this place on the 31st of last month," he wrote. "The snow so deep we could not find the road. We have killed most of our cattle. We must stay here until spring and live on poor beef without bread or salt." They prayed for rescue. None came. On December 16th, a group of 17 set out on snowshoes made from oxbows and rawhide. 13 men, 4 women, and a 12-year-old boy. They carried 6 days of food. They called themselves the Forlorn Hope. The first few days they climbed through white silence. Then the blizzards came. Food ran out. Men began to hallucinate. When the storm cleared, one of them, Antonio, the animal handler, was dead. Then Franklin Graves. Then Patrick Dolan, who went mad, tore off his clothes and ran into the storm, screaming it was warm as summer. The survivors burned his body for warmth. Then they did what human instinct both forbids and commands. They ate. Flesh was cut, dried, rationed. They wept as they ate, swearing never to tell. 2 Native American guides, Salvador and Luis, who had come to help them, fled when they learned what was happening. Days later, starving, the group found them asleep under a tree and shot them both. After 33 days, only 7 stumbled out of the mountains alive. When rescuers found them, their eyes were hollow, their clothes blood-stained. They had walked through hell and left their souls there. Back at the lake, the families still trapped endured worse. The oxhide ran out. Children starved in their mother's arms. The dead froze where they fell, and when food was gone, they too became food. It wasn't savagery, it was math, eat or die. In February 1847, a rescue team led by William Eddy, one of the snowshoe survivors, reached the camps. They called out through the snow. A woman appeared from a drift, her face pale as ash. "Are you men from California?" she asked. "Or are you angels?" The rescuers gave food carefully, afraid to kill the starving with kindness. They found cabins buried up to the roofline, the oxhide black and stinking from rot. 13 lay dead in the snow. Those who could walk were let out, 23 in all. The rest were too weak. They would have to wait for another rescue. More teams came, one after another. Each time they found fewer alive. Each time more of the dead were missing flesh. The last rescuer to arrive found only one man still breathing, Louis Keseberg. In his cabin, a pot simmered over the fire. Inside, they found human remains. Near him lay George Donner's pistols, jewelry, and gold. When accused, Keseberg claimed that Tamsin Donner, George's wife, had given him the money before she died, asking him to care for her children. Others swore he'd murdered her. No one ever proved it. When the survivors finally reached California, they were ghosts. Out of 87 who began, only 48 survived. No one over 50 lived. Children, lighter and with slower metabolisms, endured the longest. Families like the Reeds and Breens made it through intact. The Donners did not. Virginia Reed, only 12 years old, wrote later to her cousin in Illinois, "Never take no cutoffs and hurry along as fast as you can." Her words became the epitaph for an entire generation of dreamers. The Donner story spread like wildfire across America. Newspapers turned it into both horror and heroism, depending on who was buying. Some called them pioneers who refused to quit. Others called them sinners who ate their own. But all agreed on one thing: the mountains had claimed their due. Lansford Hastings, the man whose map led them astray, spent the rest of his life defending his shortcut. He said he only meant to help. History never forgave him. Years later, the trail they carved became a highway for thousands more. Fortune seekers chasing the gold rush that followed just 2 winters after the tragedy. Most never knew they were walking over graves. Some even camped by the same lake, unaware of the bones beneath their feet. When snow finally melted that spring of 1847, soldiers buried what they could find. A few cabins were burned, others left to rot, and the Sierra went silent again. Over the decades that followed, curiosity grew where horror once lived. People came to the lake not in fear but in fascination. Tourists chipped away bits of bone and wood to take home as souvenirs. By the 1880s, local historian Charles McGlashan gathered letters, diaries, and witness accounts, piecing together the truth. He wrote that the Donner Party was not a tale of monsters, but of humans pushed past the limits of body and soul. In 1918, a monument rose above Donner Lake, a bronze family standing tall against the mountain wind, their faces turned westward. At its base, a plaque marks the snow line that trapped them 70 years earlier. It stands not as a memorial to death, but to endurance. Every year, more than 200,000 people visit that monument. They come to remember not what the Donners did, but what they refused to give up. Hope, even when the world turned to ice. The Donner tragedy isn't just a story of cannibalism. It's a mirror, showing us what we are when the light goes out, what we'll fight for, what we'll sacrifice, what we'll become when the dream we chase turns on us. Out there in those mountains, men and women face the same choice every frontier ever gave: die decent or live desperate. And maybe that's why the story endures, because it's not about hunger or horror or even snow. It's about survival, about the terrifying, beautiful truth of being human in a world that doesn't care if you make it or not. You've been listening to Echoing Westwinds, where every whisper of the past still rides the wind. If you want to keep exploring the hidden corners of American history, the legends, the lies, and the ghosts that built a nation, subscribe and stay close to the fire. The West still has stories to tell,